The phone buzzed in the middle of the night, ripping me from sleep. The number was blocked. I answered, expecting some scam or wrong number, but the voice on the other end was one I knew far too well. "Nate," she whispered. It was Hannah, my wife, but I'd just seen her an hour ago, sleeping beside me. I turned, but the bed was empty. My heart thundered. I gripped the phone tighter, my voice low. "Hannah? Where are you?" There was a pause, her breathing tense. Nate, I'm in trouble. You need to listen to me carefully. He's coming for me, and I don't know if I can stop him. I don't know if I can protect you." A car engine roared in the background, and then a male voice, cold and taunting, cut through the line. "Hope you're ready, Nathan. Hannah's been keeping secrets. Time you found out the truth." The line went dead, and as I sat there, staring at the empty side of the bed, I realized I was alone, completely unaware of where she was or who had taken her. The call came at 2:13 a.m., dragging me from a sleep so deep it felt like drowning. At first, I ignored it, thinking it was a wrong number. But when my phone buzzed a second time, I reached over, still half asleep, and saw a blocked number. Something cold clenched in my gut. "Nate." The voice on the other end was barely more than a whisper, but I recognized it instantly. It was Hannah, my wife. My heart stopped. She had been lying beside me just an hour ago. "Hannah," I said, forcing myself awake. "Where are you?" There was silence on the other end, only her shallow breathing, and then she spoke, a note of urgency creeping in. "Listen to me, Nate. I can't talk long. You're in danger. He knows about you. He knows everything." "Who knows?" I asked, sitting up and glancing around our bedroom as if I could find her hidden somewhere in the shadows. A loud, echoing thud came through the line, followed by her sharp intake of breath. "Just stay away from me, Nate," she said, her voice suddenly thick with fear. "Forget you ever knew me." And then the line went dead. I stared at my phone, the silence pressing down on me like a weight. Hannah was gone, and I had no idea where or why. But I couldn't just sit there, not knowing she was out there, maybe in trouble. I threw on a jacket, grabbed my keys, and ran out into the night. We'd moved to Seattle for a fresh start. Hannah had wanted a change, a break from the monotony, she'd said. We'd been together for nearly 3 years, married for one, and I thought I knew her better than anyone. But from the moment we settled into our new apartment overlooking Puget Sound, I'd sensed a shift. She was distant, restless, her smile smaller, her laughs less frequent. She'd go out for long walks alone, coming back looking tired but more at ease, her hair smelling faintly of salt and rain. I had asked her once, teasingly, if she was seeing someone. She'd laughed it off, ruffling my hair and pressing a kiss to my cheek. But that night, she'd stayed awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, lost in thoughts she never shared. "I just feel like there's something missing," she'd admitted once, her voice soft in the dark. I'd squeezed her hand, not understanding, but wanting to be there for her. "You have me," I'd said, only half joking. She'd smiled, her eyes sad. "I know, Nate. I know." Now, as I drove through the quiet streets of Seattle, headlights cutting through the fog, I replayed her words in my mind, searching for any clue to where she might have gone. I called her again, the line ringing and ringing until it went to voicemail. I was about to hang up when I noticed a text message flashing on my screen from an unknown number. "If you want answers, meet me where it all began." You know where? I stared at the message, my mind racing. Where it all began. Our first date had been at a little park by the lake, a place we'd revisited many times over the years. It was our place, the spot where we'd laughed and talked about everything we dreamed of doing together. Somehow, I knew that's where she wanted me to go. The drive there felt like a fever dream, each turn pulling me deeper into the mystery of what was happening. The park was empty when I arrived, a cold wind stirring the trees, casting strange shadows across the gravel path. I scanned the area, hoping to see her waiting for me, hoping for some explanation. But the only figure in sight was a man standing by the edge of the lake, his back to me, hands shoved deep into the pockets of a long coat. I hesitated, the hairs on my neck prickling with an uneasy feeling. He must have sensed me, because he turned, his face coming into view under the pale glow of a nearby street lamp. "Nate," he said, his mouth twisting into a half-smile that held no warmth. "It's good to finally meet you. Who are you?" I demanded, my voice more steady than I felt. "Where's Hannah?" He tilted his head, examining me with a cold, calculating gaze. "I'm someone she should have told you about long ago. Call me Aaron. Though I'm guessing she left that part out when she told you her little fairy tales." "What do you want with us?" I asked, feeling the pulse of anger rise up in me. He took a slow step forward, his smile darkening. "It's not what I want from you, Nathan. It's what I want from her. You're just a complication." Every muscle in my body tensed. "If you've hurt her," he laughed, the sound echoing hollowly across the lake. "Oh, I haven't hurt her. But that doesn't mean I won't if I have to. Hannah owes me, and she knows it. She thought she could run, hide behind a perfect little marriage, a new life. But some debts can't be erased, Nathan." He pulled something from his pocket, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought it was a weapon. But it was a bracelet, Hannah's. The one I'd given her on our first anniversary. He tossed it at my feet, a taunt that made my stomach twist with anger. "I think you'll find she hasn't been entirely honest with you," Aaron continued, his voice soft, menacing. "But if you want to find her, I suggest you start looking a little harder." With that, he turned and walked back into the shadows, his form swallowed up by the darkness. I picked up the bracelet, turning it over in my hand, feeling the cold metal press against my skin. Hannah's disappearance, her strange behavior, Aaron's words. All of it felt like pieces of a puzzle I didn't have the answers to. But I knew one thing. I wouldn't stop until I found her, until I had the truth. I drove home, my mind racing, sifting through every memory I had of her, looking for clues I might have missed. When I stepped into our apartment, I went straight to our bedroom, tearing through her drawers, her shelves, desperate for anything that might explain why she'd been hiding from me. And that's when I found it. A small, black notebook hidden at the bottom of a box. I flipped it open, my heart pounding as I scanned the pages. Names, dates, numbers, all written in a neat, careful script. It looked like a ledger, a record of transactions? No, not transactions, blackmail. Each entry contained details about a different person. Politicians, businessmen, people in power. I didn't recognize most of the names, but one stood out, written in bold, angry letters across an entire page. Aaron. A sickening realization hit me as I pieced together what I was looking at. Aaron wasn't just some ex-boyfriend or a scorned lover. He was someone who had been part of Hannah's life in a way I couldn't have imagined. Someone who held power over her. And if she'd been keeping this notebook, then she must have known how dangerous he was. She'd known, and she hadn't told me. My hands shook as I closed the notebook, the weight of betrayal settling over me. She had lied to me, lied about who she was, about the life she'd led before we met. I'd thought I knew everything about her, but now it was clear that the woman I loved was hiding secrets so deep they had the power to destroy us both. But as the anger faded, all I felt was fear. Fear for her, and fear for what Aaron might do if I didn't act. I didn't know who to trust, didn't know if I could trust her. But one thing was certain. I was going to find Hannah, and I was going to get answers. The next morning, I sat at our kitchen table, staring at the black notebook in front of me. It felt like holding a time bomb, ticking away, counting down to something I couldn't control. But I couldn't just leave it. Not if it meant protecting her. After hours of sitting, of planning, I made a decision. I sent Aaron a message from an untraceable number. A last-ditch effort to take control of a situation spiraling out of my hands. If you want what she took, meet me at the pier tonight. Alone. It was a bluff, a risk that could easily backfire. But if Aaron thought I had leverage, maybe I could get Hannah back. Maybe I could finally put an end to this nightmare. As the hours passed, doubt gnawed at me, but I forced myself to stay steady. When night fell, I got into my car, the black notebook tucked into my jacket, and drove to the pier, hoping against hope that this wouldn't be the last time I saw her. The pier was deserted when I arrived, the icy wind whipping off the water and carrying the smell of salt and damp wood. I parked my car at the far end of the lot, tucked between two shadows, and stepped out, every nerve on edge as I scanned the empty dock. In the distance, a single figure moved along the wooden planks, his coat flapping in the wind like a predator's dark wings. Aaron. He moved slowly, his pace unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world. I tightened my grip on the black notebook in my pocket. It was my only bargaining chip, my only hope of seeing Hannah again. Aaron stopped about 10 feet away, his face partially obscured in shadow, though I could see the glint of a smile that didn't reach his eyes. So you took the bait. How charming. I forced myself to stand tall, keeping my voice steady. I'm not here to play games, Aaron. I have what you want, but I want Hannah back, safe and unharmed. He laughed softly, a sound that sent a chill through me. You really think you're in any position to make demands? Hannah isn't yours to negotiate over, Nathan. She belongs to me. Belongs? I snapped, anger sparking. She's not a possession. His expression shifted, a dangerous glint in his eye. You think she told you the truth about us? About what she really is? He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Hannah was never the person you think she is. She may have convinced you otherwise, but I know her better than anyone. She has a debt to repay, a debt she'll never escape. I held my ground, refusing to let him see my fear. Then take this. I held up the notebook, watching his eyes light up as he recognized it. Take it and leave us alone. You want revenge? Then here's every single name, every leverage you ever used. It's all in here. Aaron's smile widened as he reached out, his hand hovering near the notebook. You've done well, Nathan. Too well. But you don't really understand the stakes here. Before I could react, he grabbed the notebook and pulled it out of my grasp. He flipped it open, leafing through the pages, satisfaction glinting in his eyes. But then he paused, his expression hardening as he noticed a missing section in the back. These pages? He looked up, anger twisting his face. Where are the last entries? I don't know what you're talking about, I replied, feigning ignorance. His grip on the notebook tightened, his voice laced with fury. Don't lie to me. There are names missing, important ones. The people Hannah promised me. My most valuable assets. He took a threatening step forward, his eyes narrowing. If you don't have them, then I suggest you start explaining why I shouldn't take my anger out on both of you. I clenched my fists, my heart pounding. She didn't give them to me. She left them out. She must have hidden them somewhere. But if you think hurting her will get you what you want, you're wrong. She won't tell you anything. He laughed again, but this time it was colder, darker. Oh, I have ways of making people talk, Nathan. And as much as I hate to admit it, I may need you after all. You have a certain influence over her. What are you talking about? I said, feeling dread coil in my stomach. You're her weakness, Nathan, he replied with a smirk. The one person she'd do anything for. The one person she'd risk her life to protect. He tilted his head, studying me with calculating eyes. And I think we can use that to our advantage. Before I could respond, he turned and began to walk away, his voice drifting back to me through the darkness. Follow me, if you really want to see her again. I followed Aaron along the pier, my mind spinning as I tried to piece together his motives. The way he spoke about Hannah, the possessiveness in his tone, it was clear he saw her as something more than an ex or even an adversary. He viewed her as a prize, a possession he wasn't willing to let go of. And somehow I had become part of his twisted game. He led me to a narrow alley a few blocks from the pier, where a car was parked, its headlights off. He opened the passenger door and motioned for me to get inside. I hesitated. Where are we going? To meet Hannah, he said simply, his expression unreadable. But let's be clear, you're only coming because I need her cooperation. Once I get what I want, you'll disappear from her life. Permanently. A surge of anger flared inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm. If he really knew Hannah as well as he claimed, he'd know she wouldn't willingly go with him unless she thought I was safe. As much as it pained me, I had to play along. I climbed into the car, and Aaron got behind the wheel, his gaze flickering toward me with something between amusement and disdain. You know, you really don't seem like her type. She usually prefers men with a little more edge. I kept my gaze forward, refusing to let him bait me. Maybe she was looking for something real, something you clearly couldn't offer. His grip tightened on the steering wheel, his jaw clenching. You're awfully brave, Nathan. But bravery won't keep you alive if you cross me. We drove in silence, the tension thick in the small car. After what felt like an eternity, we pulled up to an abandoned building on the outskirts of town. Its windows broken, the paint peeling from the walls. It looked like a place dreams went to die. Aaron parked and turned to me, his eyes glittering with barely concealed malice. She's inside, but remember, I'm watching. One wrong move and she'll pay the price. I nodded, swallowing the lump of fear in my throat as I stepped out of the car. I entered the building, my footsteps echoing in the empty, decaying space, and there, in the dim light of a far corner, I saw her. Hannah was sitting on the floor, her back against the wall, her hands bound in front of her. She looked up as I approached, her face streaked with dirt, her eyes wide with surprise and relief. "Nate," she whispered, her voice raw. "I told you to stay away." I knelt beside her, taking her hands in mine. "I couldn't. I had to find you." She shook her head, her gaze flickering toward the shadows where I knew Aaron was watching. "He's not going to let you go, Nate. Not unless he gets what he wants." I squeezed her hands, leaning close. "Then we'll give him what he wants. But only if we do it on our terms." Aaron approached, his expression smug as he watched us. "Touching reunion," he sneered. "Now, if you two are done, I think we have some business to discuss." Hannah looked up at him, her jaw set in defiance. "You're not going to get anything from me, Aaron. You can threaten me all you want, but I'm not giving you what you want." He crouched down in front of her, his gaze dark. "I think you underestimate how far I'm willing to go, Hannah. I've waited too long to let you slip away again." I intervened, trying to keep my voice calm. "If you want her to cooperate, you'll have to trust me." He raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Trust you? Why would I do that?" "Because she won't give you anything if she thinks I'm in danger," I said, hoping I could play into his twisted sense of control. "If you let her think she has some say in this, she'll be more likely to cooperate." He seemed to consider this, his gaze flickering between us. Then, reluctantly, he nodded. "Fine. But if either of you tries anything, I won't hesitate." He pulled out a knife, slicing the bonds around her wrists, and Hannah flexed her hands, her gaze meeting mine with a spark of hope. We exchanged a silent understanding. Whatever happened next, we'd face it together. We didn't stop driving until the city was far behind us. I had no idea where we were going, only that I needed to put as much distance between us and Aaron as possible. Beside me, Hannah stared out the window, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She hadn't spoken since we escaped, and her silence was a heavy weight in the car. When we reached a quiet motel on the outskirts of a small town, I pulled into the lot and killed the engine. The parking lot was empty, the place half hidden by a thick line of trees. I turned to her, finally breaking the silence. "We're safe here, at least for now." She nodded but still wouldn't meet my eyes. I wanted to reach out, to touch her hand, to reassure her, but a part of me held back. After everything I'd learned, I still didn't know if I could fully trust her. Inside the motel room, we sat across from each other at the small table by the window, the dim light casting shadows over her face. I waited, giving her space, but I couldn't stay silent anymore. "Hannah, I need you to tell me everything. The truth this time." She took a deep breath, her gaze finally meeting mine, though her expression was haunted. "I know. I owe you that much." She hesitated, then began, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Aaron and I—" She paused, looking down at her hands. "We were together for years, but it wasn't love, Nate. Not the way I thought it was, not the way it should have been. He used people, he used me, He had power over people in ways you can't imagine. Blackmail, bribery. He knew things about people that kept them bound to him. And I thought I could handle it. That maybe I could change him. I bit back a surge of anger, forcing myself to stay calm. And you were part of it? She nodded slowly, her face twisting with regret. At first, I convinced myself that I was helping him. But I was young, naive. By the time I realized how dangerous he was, it was too late. I was in too deep. He had things on me, things I couldn't afford to let anyone know. So I ran. Her voice shook, and she wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to shield herself from the memories. I thought if I left everything behind, changed my name, cut all ties, I could start over. That's why I never told you about him, Nate. I was terrified he'd find me, but I was more terrified of losing you. I thought, if you knew, you'd never look at me the same way. I took a deep breath, the anger in my chest easing just enough for sympathy to seep in. I couldn't deny the hurt, the sense of betrayal. But I could see the pain in her eyes, the years she'd spent running from a life she never wanted. Hannah, I said gently, reaching across the table to take her hand. You didn't have to go through all of this alone. I would have helped you no matter what. A tear slipped down her cheek, and she gave me a small, sad smile. I know that now, but Aaron wouldn't let me go so easily. He spent his life getting even with people who wronged him, people who thought they could escape. And he sees my leaving as the ultimate betrayal. She glanced down, her voice barely a whisper. That's why he won't stop. Not until he's taken everything from me. For the next hour, we talked, piecing together fragments of her past that she'd kept hidden. The names in the notebook, the people Aaron had controlled, they were all part of a network that spanned high-ranking officials, business moguls, even law enforcement. He used secrets as currency, and with her knowledge of his activities, she was his most dangerous liability. But there was something else in her story that gnawed at me. A detail she glossed over, as if afraid to bring it into the light. There's something you're not telling me, isn't there? I asked, watching her closely. She hesitated, her gaze darting to the window as if considering another escape. Then finally she sighed, resigned. There's one last name in the notebook, a name that wasn't listed with the others. Whose name? She swallowed, her voice barely a whisper. Mine. He has information on me, proof of things I did to keep myself safe, things that could ruin me. He planned to use it if I ever betrayed him, to destroy any chance I had at a normal life. My heart sank. I understood now why she'd been so afraid, why she'd kept running even after she left him. It wasn't just Aaron. It was the specter of her own mistakes, the shame she'd buried along with her past. I reached out, taking her hand. You don't have to be afraid anymore. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. She looked up, her expression softening. I don't deserve this, Nate. I don't deserve you. But thank you. As the sun rose, I made a decision. We couldn't keep running. We'd never be safe as long as Aaron was out there. It was time to end this once and for all. With Hannah's reluctant help, I devised a plan. We would go to the authorities, but we needed leverage, something that would make Aaron's allies turn on him. Hannah mentioned that there was one last copy of the notebook, a copy Aaron kept hidden for emergencies, his insurance against betrayal. If we could find it, she said, her eyes glinting with a renewed determination, it would be enough to bring him down, enough to put him away for good. It was a risky plan, but it was our only option. With the details in place, we drove back toward the city, the weight of our decision hanging heavy between us. Hannah knew where Aaron might be hiding it, an old storage facility he used for his insurance policies. When we arrived, the place was eerily quiet, the sound of our footsteps echoing through the narrow halls. We searched quickly, scanning the rows of boxes and shelves, until finally, in a dusty corner, we found it. A steel box, locked but bearing Aaron's initials. I forced it open, and inside, beneath layers of dust, was another notebook, identical to the one Hannah had carried. I flipped it open, and sure enough, there were the names, dates, transactions, proof of every dirty secret he'd ever held. We had him, but just as we turned to leave, a figure blocked our path. Aaron, his face twisted with anger, his eyes dark with a fury I'd never seen. "You really thought you could get away from me, didn't you?" he sneered, his gaze fixed on Hannah. "You thought you could steal from me and just disappear?" I stepped in front of her, holding up the notebook. "It's over, Aaron. We have everything. The police will be here any minute." He laughed, a bitter sound. "The police? You really think they'll protect you from me?" He reached into his coat, pulling out a gun, his finger hovering over the trigger. "You're nothing to me, Nathan. You were just a means to an end." But Hannah stepped forward, her gaze steady, her voice cold. "This ends now, Aaron. You won't hurt anyone else." For a moment, he faltered, a flicker of hesitation crossing his face. And in that split second, I lunged, grabbing his arm and forcing the gun to the side. We struggled, each of us fighting for control until finally, with a sickening crunch, the gun fell to the ground, skittering across the floor. Hannah moved quickly, grabbing it and pointing it at him, her hand steady. "It's over, Aaron. You're finished." He sneered, but his defiance faded as the distant sound of sirens filled the air. The police were on their way. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. We stood there, waiting in tense silence as the sirens grew louder, until finally, the doors burst open and officers flooded the room, taking Aaron into custody. He shot one last venomous glare at Hannah, but she met his gaze with a quiet strength unshaken. In the weeks that followed, life slowly began to return to normal. The evidence we'd uncovered was enough to dismantle Aaron's network, to bring down the people who had once protected him. And though the process was painful, exposing parts of Hannah's past she'd long buried, she faced it head-on, refusing to let her mistakes define her. One evening, as we sat on the balcony of our apartment, looking out over the city, she turned to me, her gaze soft, vulnerable. "Thank you, Nate, for everything. I don't know what I would have done without you." I took her hand, my heart full of a quiet, unwavering certainty. "We're in this together, Hannah. Whatever comes next, we'll face it side by side." She smiled, a real smile, and for the first time since this all began, I saw hope in her eyes. We had been through hell, and there would be scars, memories that would never fade. But we'd found our way back to each other. And as I looked out at the lights of the city, I knew that whatever lay ahead, we would face it together, free from the shadows of her past.